That message changed everything. It wasn't a breakup text or some bad update from work. It came from my own father, telling me that they wouldn't be coming to my housewarming. My name is Nina, and that single message altered the meaning of everything I had spent years building. It said, "We're not coming to your housewarming. Your brother just moved too." There was no call before it, no explanation afterward, no apology waiting behind the words. Just that one short sentence, blunt and cold, harsher than the gray rain that always seems to fall over Seattle. I read it once, then again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder. Finally, I typed back a simple reply. "That's okay, Dad." Then I placed my phone face down on the dining table and stared at the reflection in the polished wood. The oak surface was something I had personally chosen and designed, smooth and glowing faintly under the soft coastal light coming through the tall windows. Tomorrow, the Bravo television crew would arrive our newest design show. For everyone watching at home, it would just be another program, another episode filling a primetime slot. For me, though, it meant something deeper. It was the first time my name would appear on screen without being tucked behind someone else's credits. The villa around me stood completely still, every room quiet, yet every wall seemed to hold the echo of the years I had spent working to reach that exact moment. I had planned the evening differently. I had planned it carefully, down to the smallest details, the arrangement of the plates, the tone of the lighting, even the specific song that would play softly when my parents stepped through the front door for the first time. I pictured them walking through the house, seeing the rooms I had designed, finally understanding what I had built with my own hands. But now none of that would happen. They wouldn't be there. Even so, I didn't erase the message from my phone. I left it exactly where it was. A quiet reminder that sometimes silence speaks louder than love ever could. If you have ever poured everything you had into being seen, only to be answered with silence, then this story might feel familiar to you. Stay with it until the end, because sometimes silence becomes the strongest answer anyone can give. Looking back, it probably began on a dull gray Thanksgiving morning when I was 16 years old. The entire house smelled of cinnamon, roasted pumpkin, and warm spices drifting from the oven. My mother moved quickly between the stove and the kitchen counter, humming softly along to an old song playing on the radio. My father stood nearby, commercial. In the center of it all was my younger brother, Evan. He stirred a bowl of batter with dramatic enthusiasm, splashing flour and sugar around while my parents laughed at his exaggerated effort. Mom called him her holiday miracle, while Dad kept recording him from every angle, clearly delighted. I tried to help by reaching toward the mixing bowl, thinking maybe I could take a turn stirring or measuring something. But my mom gently took the bowl from my hands before I could do anything and said, "Sweetheart, let Evan take care of that." I stepped aside and nodded like it didn't matter. When Evan accidentally spilled a cloud of flour across the counter, everyone burst out laughing, and Dad captured the entire moment like it was the highlight of the day. Meanwhile, I stood near the sink, quietly wiping my hands, waiting for someone to notice that I had already washed the dishes, folded the cloth napkins, and arranged the plates neatly around the table. No one did. Every word of praise, every laugh, every bit of attention circled around Evan. At one point, I suggested a simple idea for the centerpiece, something with pine cones and candles, something cozy and warm. Dad lowered the camera for a moment and glanced at me briefly. "Don't make everything about you, Nina," he said in a calm, almost indifferent tone. The words landed heavier than he probably realized. I swallowed whatever response tried to rise in my throat and turned back toward the sink, focusing on the rhythm of running water and clinking dishes. Behind me, Evan cracked another joke about the turkey. Mom clapped her hands in amusement, and Dad lifted the camcorder again to capture the moment. The world in that kitchen seemed to move perfectly forward without me. Later that afternoon, the house filled with the comforting scent of roasted vegetables and freshly baked pies. Before dinner, I quietly placed a small gift on the dining table. It was a hand-painted card with a short quote about gratitude written across the front. It wasn't anything expensive, but I had spent hours painting it carefully the night before. By the time everyone sat down for dinner, the card had been pushed aside and was now half hidden under a stack of magazines. That evening, Evan led the prayer at the table, his voice confident and warm. When he finished, he joked about being the favorite child, and laughter spread easily through the room. I laughed along with them, though inside something small and quiet ached. Dinner unfolded the same way it always had. Dad asked Evan about school, while Mom shared stories about his soccer games. I remained mostly silent, offering to refill glasses or pass dishes across the table. Those little gestures were my way of trying to feel included, but they seemed to disappear without notice. At some point, I realized that silence was easier than trying to compete for attention. After dinner, once the plates were empty and the conversation softened, I began clearing the table. Mom joined me briefly, stacking a few plates into my arms. "You're such a good helper," she said with a quick smile, before turning back toward Dad to continue discussing Evan's college applications. Her words were meant kindly, but they didn't reach the place she probably intended them to. A helper. That seemed to be the role I had been given. I washed the dishes slowly, watching my faint reflection in the kitchen window. Outside, the Seattle sky had darkened into that deep gray color that feels like it swallows the horizon. Somewhere upstairs, I could hear Evan playing his guitar, his voice echoing faintly through the hallway. I dried my hands and walked quietly back to my room. From beneath my bed, I pulled out the small notebook I kept hidden there. The pages carried the faint smell of paint and ink from all the sketches and ideas I had scribbled into it over the years. That night, I wrote just one sentence across a blank page. It was the only promise I knew how to make to myself. One day, they'll remember me without me asking. 4 years later, I left Seattle with a single suitcase and far too many words left unsaid. The morning air was damp, the kind that clings to your skin like a reminder of everything you're leaving behind. My mother stood near the doorway, twisting her hands together, while my father stared down the driveway as if avoiding my eyes. Evan had already hugged me earlier that morning, a quick, distracted goodbye before rushing off to meet his friends. I waited for something more, a word, a promise, but none came. When I received a full scholarship to study communications in California, I thought for the first time they would be proud. Instead, Dad frowned as if I had announced something foolish. "Communications isn't stable," he said. "You're good with details. Why not accounting or law?" Mom added softly, "It's too far, honey. You don't know anyone there." I wanted to tell her that distance might be the point, that maybe space was the only way I could breathe, but I just nodded. A week later, Evan announced that he had been accepted into an MBA program. The living room filled with excitement. Dad opened a bottle of wine, and Mom started planning how to help him with his tuition. I overheard her say, "We'll cover what his scholarship doesn't." No one mentioned my scholarship or asked if I needed help moving. I smiled through the moment, holding my acceptance letter in my lap like it was invisible. In California, the sun felt brighter but lonelier. My apartment was a small studio above a laundromat that smelled faintly of detergent and steam. I spent nights editing videos for a small creative agency that barely paid enough for groceries. My meals were instant noodles, sometimes with an egg when I could afford it. I told myself it was temporary, that hunger was cheaper than asking for help. My friend Mara, a film major I met during orientation, was the only person who saw through the act. She had this quiet strength, the kind that didn't need to fill silence to make it safe. We'd sit on the roof of our building at night, sharing cheap coffee and stories about the families we left behind. "You know," she said once, "you don't have to keep earning a place in someone's life. Sometimes leaving is what saves you." Her words settled into me like sunlight through fog. During my second semester, I called home less. Conversations with Mom always drifted toward Evan, his new internship, his professor's praise, the networking events he attended. She ended every call with, "You should visit soon," though no one offered to help with the ticket. I'd hang up, stare at my reflection on the dark laptop screen, and wonder if they even noticed how much quieter I'd become. I learned to build small routines around the silence. Early mornings at the beach before class, sketching storyboards on my notebook. Late nights color-correcting footage for clients who never remembered my name. Each project taught me something: how to balance light, how to frame a story so that even ordinary things looked meaningful. Maybe that was what I had been doing my whole life, finding beauty in being unseen. By my third year, I stopped checking family group messages. The updates were the same: Evan's promotions, Dad's weekend projects, Mom's new recipes. My own messages sat unread. It hurt less when I stopped expecting replies. When graduation came, I sent a photo of me in my cap and gown. Mom responded with a heart emoji. Dad didn't reply. That night, I sat on the floor of my studio, surrounded by sketches and empty takeout boxes. The city outside hummed with life I couldn't quite touch. I thought about the years spent trying to fit into a frame that was never built for me. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. By the time I turned 30, the calls finally came from the places I used to dream about. It started with a small station back in Seattle, the same city I had once left behind to find myself. I joined as an assistant producer, barely earning enough to cover rent. But for the first time in years, I felt I was exactly where I needed to be. My supervisor, Paul, a senior producer with 2 decades of local television experience, noticed how I stayed late after everyone left. He would lean against the doorway and say, "You've got the eye, Nina. Don't waste it polishing other people's work." His words stuck with me, not because they were kind, but because they sounded like permission. Under Paul's guidance, I learned the rhythm of storytelling that connected people, how to make ordinary moments look like something worth remembering. After months of working behind the camera, I proposed an idea for a short feature called Homes of the Sound, a series about the stories hidden within the coastal houses of Puget Sound. It was meant to be small, just a local filler segment, but viewers loved it. People wrote letters, sent photos of their own homes, shared memories tied to weathered walls and creaking docks. Within 6 months, the miniseries became the most watched program in its slot. When Paul retired, he handed me his old director's chair with a quiet smile. I used my savings and a grant from the station to found my own company, Northlight Media. At first, it was just me and 3 freelancers working out of a borrowed office, editing footage between coffee breaks and deadlines. We focused on documentaries about architecture craftsmanship and the people who shaped the spaces they lived in. The company grew fast, fueled not by investors, but by stories that felt real. 2 years later, Northlight Media won a regional award for visual storytelling. I remember standing on stage under the warm lights, hearing my name, followed by applause that didn't fade too quickly. For once, I wasn't invisible. Soon after, Bravo reached out. They wanted me to direct a national series titled Open Homes USA. It was a dream disguised as a contract. The budget was massive, the schedule relentless, but every shot felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I traveled from coast to coast, meeting designers, homeowners, and dreamers who reminded me of everything I used to long for. The series became a hit, syndicated across multiple platforms, and suddenly my inbox filled with offers I used to believe were meant for someone else. When the final episode aired, I decided it was time for something personal. I bought a $12 million villa in Queen Anne, a hilltop mansion overlooking the bay, sunlight spilling across the glass walls each morning. It wasn't just a house. It was a space built from every sleepless night, every bowl of instant noodles, every quiet rejection. I turned part of it into a studio for my next project, a creative space for new artists who reminded me of the girl I used to be. As the finishing touches were made, I wrote a letter inviting Mom, Dad, and Evan to the housewarming. I imagined them walking through the marble foyer, seeing the life I had built without their applause. That night, a notification blinked on my phone, a message from Dad. "We'll skip your housewarming. Your brother just moved too." I read it twice, the words familiar in their casual cruelty. I typed my reply slowly, choosing each word with care. "That's okay, Dad." I placed the phone face down on the table and looked around the villa, every corner gleaming, every light set just right. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. I had waited half my life for their approval and realized I didn't need it anymore. The next morning, the sky cleared, not my thoughts. I woke up early, unable to shake the quiet ache that had settled overnight. The message from Dad still lingered in my mind, heavy but dull, like a bruise fading under the skin. I sat at the edge of the long oak table and realized that it had been built for a family that would never sit there. Yet something in me refused to let it stay empty. If they wouldn't come, I would fill those seats myself, not with the people who had turned away, but with those who had once stood quietly beside me. I took out a notepad and began writing names. The cameraman who stayed late helping me fix a broken light on my first shoot. My neighbor who brought soup when she saw delivery boxes piling up outside my door. My old teacher who told me to keep painting even when grades said otherwise. And my Aunt Lorraine, who had always remembered me, even when my parents didn't. With each name, the list felt more like a memory being repaired. Later that day, I hired a local chef named Margaret. She arrived with calm confidence, asking for no introductions beyond a handshake. As we reviewed the menu, she paused and asked, "Who's the dinner for?" I told her, "For people who were never invited." She didn't question it further. She simply nodded and said, "Then it will be something worth remembering." We planned a dinner that felt honest, nothing that screamed luxury. Salmon, roasted vegetables, and a pear tart, the kind that carried warmth rather than decoration. Margaret suggested a few touches, simple and thoughtful. I told her I wanted the night to feel like a conversation that had been waiting too long to begin. When the guests arrived, there was no red carpet, no introduction, just the sound of shoes against the floor, and laughter that seemed to find its place naturally. They looked surprised, touched, curious, but none asked why they were there. I welcomed each one by name, and for the first time in years, I felt present, not performing. As dinner unfolded, the air grew lighter. Conversations wove together. Stories of lost chances, unexpected kindness, small triumphs no one had celebrated before. Lorraine leaned over and whispered, "You made something good out of nothing, sweetheart." Across the room, Margaret watched silently, her expression soft, knowing. By the time dessert was served, the space felt complete. There were no speeches, no toasts, just an understanding that this night was about being seen. When the plates emptied and the laughter settled, I stayed behind to clear the table. Each chair had been used. Each plate held proof that someone had belonged, even for a few hours. I rested my hand on the smooth wood and smiled quietly. Everyone deserves a seat. By sunset, the crew had arrived, cameras, cables, and quiet expectations. I greeted them at the entrance, their polite nods and practiced smiles filling the air with that strange mix of anticipation and restraint that always comes before filming. The long table stood ready again, not as a stage, but as proof that something real had happened here. Margaret moved through the kitchen with her usual calm precision, plating the final dishes as if it were any other night. But this night was different. It wasn't about food or production or ratings. It was about a quiet truth being seen. The guests returned, the same ones who had shared that first dinner, and their presence filled the space with something steadier than applause. As the cameras started rolling, I felt no need to perform. The conversations flowed naturally. People spoke softly, laughed freely, and didn't look toward the lens for validation. A few members of the crew exchanged glances, maybe realizing this wasn't the kind of show they had expected. One of the reporters, a young woman with a notebook and unsure eyes, approached me during a pause. "What inspired this?" she asked. I didn't need to think long. "Fairness isn't decoration," I said. "It's design." She wrote it down carefully, as if the words might slip away if she didn't trap them on paper. When I looked around, I saw guests leaning toward one another, listening closely. No one interrupted. No one tried to dominate the conversation. It was the kind of balance I had been chasing for years, one built not on power, but on presence. At one point, the cameraman, an older man with silver hair, stopped filming for a moment and simply watched. Later, he told me quietly, "You don't see this often. People just being." That stayed with me longer than any compliment I'd ever received. The crew kept the setup simple. No filters, no retakes, no rearranging scenes. The light stayed soft enough to see faces clearly, but not to erase the lines that made them human. The sound engineer whispered through his mic, "It feels alive in here." As the evening went on, I began to notice something small but beautiful. The way people met each other's eyes without hesitation. No one looked down, no one hid behind phones or excuses. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Margaret stood near the back, arms folded, watching quietly as she always did. She caught my gaze and nodded once, her look saying everything words couldn't. Gratitude, pride, and the shared knowledge that some moments don't need feigning to matter. The last shot of the night captured everyone still seated, the faint hum of conversation carrying through the air. The director signaled the crew to stop recording, but no one moved. They just stayed there, caught in something real, unwilling to break it. When the lights dimmed, I stayed behind, helping gather the cables, the microphones, the leftover glasses. The air felt light, unburdened, as if the house itself had exhaled. One of the assistants thanked me for the hospitality, saying it didn't feel like work. I smiled. It hadn't felt like work for me either. For years, I had built set stories and images that looked like belonging, but tonight, for the first time, I didn't have to create it. I simply lived inside it. And for the first time, I wasn't performing. I was home. A week later, the episode aired on a rainy Seattle morning. I hadn't planned to watch it live, but the sound of distant thunder made the house feel smaller, and somehow it felt right to let it play. My phone began to vibrate long before the opening credits ended. Messages stacked on top of each other, some from colleagues, some from strangers, a few from numbers I had long deleted. Most were simple, beautiful work. "Thank you for saying what no one says." Yet each one felt like a small wave touching a shore I hadn't walked in years. By mid-morning, I received a call from Aunt Lorraine. Her voice was warm, steady, the way it had always been. "You did good, sweetheart," she said. "They're facing what you carried for years." I didn't answer at first, only let her words sink in. There was no bitterness in her tone, only recognition, a kind of peace that didn't need forgiveness to exist. Later, I learned that one of Mom's neighbors had called her that morning, excited, saying, "I just saw your daughter on TV. What a wonderful project." Apparently, the conversation hadn't gone the way she expected. For hours, Mom said nothing. Then by afternoon, she posted a photo from the episode on her social media with the caption, "So proud." It spread quickly, not because of love, but because people noticed the timing. The comments filled with polite confusion. "Didn't you say she left home years ago?" Funny how pride finds its voice after the applause. My brother Evan stayed quiet for 2 days. Then someone from his office asked publicly why he hadn't been at the dinner. His answer was vague, a line about travel and scheduling conflicts. But those who had watched the episode seemed to understand more than he'd said. A few of his friends reposted clips of me speaking about belonging, adding quiet notes like, "ouch," or "that must have hurt." He stopped responding altogether after that. Dad called 6 times that week. I didn't answer once. Each time the phone rang, my chest tightened, but not with anger, more like the faint pressure of an old bruise that no longer controlled me. On the 7th call, I let it go to voicemail and listened later. His voice trembled. "I saw you. You've done something good. Then silence. A deep breath. And finally, "I'm proud." Nah. It was strange how those words, once a distant dream, arrived too late to matter, yet not too late to heal. Emails from viewers poured in. A teacher from Ohio wrote that she had used the episode to start a class discussion about fairness. A retired architect shared how the dinner reminded him of his late wife's community table project. A mother said her teenage daughter had decided to invite a lonely classmate to lunch after watching. Reading them, I realized the story had left my hands and become something else, something alive. By evening, the rain hadn't stopped. The city outside was blurred into shades of silver and gray. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching water trace paths down the glass. I thought about Mom sitting behind her screen, about Evan avoiding questions, about Dad reaching out after all these years. None of it felt like victory, not really. It felt like weather, unpredictable, cleansing, necessary. Lorraine texted again that night. "Some storms don't destroy, they reveal." I smiled, looking out at the rain that hadn't let up once all day. She was right. Some storms wash more than they ruin. 2 months later, I packed again, but this time for peace. The boxes were lighter, not because I owned less, but because I was carrying only what belonged to me. No expectations, no explanations, no ghosts from a family table that had never made room. I rented a small house in Portland, near the river, a quiet place with enough light to remind me mornings could start without noise. The first night, I slept without checking my phone. When I woke, I didn't feel the need to look back. A few days later, an email appeared from my brother Evan. The subject line was simple: "We should talk." I read it once, then deleted it without replying. There was no anger in that act, only clarity. Sometimes silence isn't punishment, it's protection. I had learned that the hard way. Every unanswered call, every late apology, had already taught me what peace required. Distance. Work followed me gently, not like before when ambition had teeth. Bravo reached out again, asking if I would return for a second season of the Table Project. The message was warm, the tone respectful. I hesitated, then typed slowly, "Yes." But this time, no family, just stories. They agreed immediately. I smiled, realizing that for the first time in my career, I wasn't chasing recognition. I was choosing alignment. Days in Portland settled into a rhythm that felt almost meditative. I'd wake early, walk along the riverside path, and watch the water catch the light. My thoughts no longer spiraled around unfinished conversations or words I wished I'd said. They simply floated like driftwood, free from direction, yet still moving forward. Margaret called once to check in, saying the new season's theme, belonging without permission, was already being discussed. I told her it fit. She laughed, understanding without needing me to explain. Sometimes I'd pass small restaurants or coffee shops and see families inside, people talking over shared meals, their faces glowing with something I couldn't name anymore. But instead of envy, I felt relief. I no longer measured my worth by where I wasn't invited. The quiet I had built was steady, not fragile, and I guarded it with the kind of gentleness that comes only after breaking. Letters from viewers still arrived, forwarded from the production office. One woman wrote that she had started hosting table nights for her neighbors, just to remind herself that kindness doesn't require blood. Another said she had forgiven her mother, but only after realizing forgiveness didn't mean returning. Each story was a reminder that what began as a show had become something deeper, a map for people finding their way back to themselves. As autumn came, the city turned gold and slow. I spent my evenings by the window, sometimes editing scripts, sometimes doing nothing at all. The silence no longer felt like absence. It felt earned. I didn't need closure from mom or dad, or an apology from Evan. Their silence no longer echoed. It simply existed, like the sound of wind moving through leaves, present, but no longer personal. Peace, I realized, isn't found in reconciliation. It's found in release. It isn't about forgiving those who hurt you so they can sleep better at night. It's about forgiving yourself for waiting so long to stop trying. One morning, I brewed coffee and watched the river drift past, slow and certain. My phone buzzed again. Another message from a network producer asking for an early meeting. I smiled, muted the notification, and took another sip. Not everything deserved a reply. For years, I'd built tables, hoping others would sit beside me. Now I finally understood. Peace isn't found at their table. I built my own. Sometimes distance is the only language love understands. You don't owe anyone access to your peace, not even family. The quiet life you build after rejection is the loudest proof of self-worth. If they don't clap for you, clap for yourself and keep walking. The strength to leave doesn't mean the absence of love. It means choosing the kind that doesn't hurt. Sometimes peace isn't given. It's built, one boundary at a time. Thank you for listening until the end. If Nana's story reminded you of your own, share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Your words might help someone else find theirs. Remember, healing doesn't always come from apology. Sometimes it comes from silence. Subscribe if you believe peace is worth protecting, even when love costs too much.